it's great to be introducing this concept of scam prevention and fraud prevention to Stouffville Chamber members and everyone else online. Thank you for joining. I hope this presentation is available on demand, or it will be available on demand. So I hope that it's useful to a lot of people. In my work, I do research of this nature so that I can continue advising clients in various sectors. So this is important for me. It's important for my clients. It's important for associations like the Stouffville Chamber. And of course, it's important for law enforcement and authoritative bodies because they need to constantly stay on top of these things. So this is actually a condensed version of a much larger presentation that touches upon all the key points. So I'm hoping that a lot of the expertise, the security and privacy expertise that I bring to the table will be useful to our viewers, to our audience today. And if it makes sense, feel free to reach out. There will be some contact information later on. Feel free to reach out with any questions that we don't get to address today. So with that, I'll proceed. Carrie, you're good to go? I assume that's a yes, even though you're muted.
I don't see your screen. Does everybody see his screen? Because I don't see it.
I'm seeing.
Yeah, I can see a COVID-19 scam screen. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Can you see it now, Carrie? Karen, can you see the screen?
I can see it, Claudiu.
Okay, so Robert can, that was you, Robert? Karen? Okay, so Carrie.
I can see it when I go to the single view.
Great. Okay, so as long as you don't focus on my face, you're good to go?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, that works well in my favor. So we're going to move right along to what is the new normal. So I've compiled a few statistics, and over the past month, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has said that they've received over 100 COVID-19 scam reports, which sounds really low, but keep in mind that a lot of people have to wait on the line to report these things, and a lot of people are simply not reporting. We know that there are millions of these going around. And so beyond that simple statistics, we've seen that 37.9% of users that work from home are now failing phishing tests. So in the kinds of tests that I'm going to present a little bit later on, users that are perhaps used to seeing phishing and spam and all sorts of malicious and deceptive messages by email are now failing the new ones simply because of the urgency of the matter, simply because a number of authoritative organizations are being impersonated as they're receiving some of these scammy messages, and we'll see what they look like. So as a result, there's been a 50% increase in fact-checking website visits, according to Snopes, Snopes.com, which has had to also increase their staff by 50% to try to compensate for that vast increase in traffic. That phishing activity that we've talked about is reported as being 667%, and that was a Barracuda number. So a company called Barracuda that does email filtering has reported these kinds of vast increases in spam and phishing email activity in particular. 20 million mentions of coronavirus related terms per day. The only body that we've seen so far that has reported losses has been the UK. So from a UK perspective, we've seen that $1.7 million in fraudulent costs has been reported. I'm sure this is much, much larger, but we don't have enough testing kits to determine how much fraud is going on. And the one statistic that I think is significant is the fact that we've seen tens of thousands of new domain names being registered on a daily basis in the month of March. Right, so we've seen a peak of 35,000 or over 35,000 on March 16th, and that's massive. So the kinds of uses that fraudsters have for these kinds of domain names vary, right? You can see them across social media, you can see them across instant messaging, text, news, almost news-worthy sites. So there's now going to be a much greater focus on what constitutes a credible news organization, and I think that's an interesting development. We're seeing a lot of it come via postal mail, telephone, and of course door-to-door. So we've seen, so for example, this one was publicized by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, and it looks as legitimate as they get, at least until you get to the .xyz domain name suffix. And a lot of people can be forgiven for clicking on this kind of thing that mentions emergency response benefits, because a lot of people have been reaching out to the banks and other financial organizations to ask just when they might see some money coming as a result of this whole situation, and of course the quarantine and the work from home situation. So there are many of these scams that are coming through text messaging. Of course, text messaging in and of itself is meant to be instantaneous. It has a variety of situations that can develop as a result. So for example, people are a lot more likely to impulsively click on a link that comes across SMS, simply because there's no additional information. So it's not like email necessarily, where you can look at the header information, you can see whether the sender is legitimate or whether there's any code running in the background. That's not the case with text messages. You simply get a message and a link. And if you fall for the link, well, it goes to a website that usually fingerprints your device and presents your device with the kind of malware that it knows will run on it. So whether you have an Android phone, whether you have an iPhone, does matter to a lot of these websites. So keep that in mind. We've seen a certain number of these checks arriving at on people's doorsteps, mostly in the United States. I just came from Florida a few days ago, and over there's been some frequency of these checks arriving in the mail, which are labeled stimulus relief program. And of course, people go to cash these things, or people go to present them to organizations that they think they came from, and they're disappointed as a result. The types of focus that we're seeing from these scams is now right up to the sector, right? So depending on what industry you happen to be in, you can expect there to be a tailored message arriving in your inbox, or even by mail, actually saying, just like this one is saying, the impact on the shipping industry, right, could be of interest to you. As you can see, the word shipping is capitalized, and you can expect that word to change depending on who they're emailing that particular day. But it places the emphasis on the fact that when we hear about data breaches on a daily basis, and we hear about organizations saying, hey, you know what, we did not lose your social insurance number, we only lost your email address and your company name, right? We only lost your company data. In other words, you don't necessarily have to lose personal information in order to be at risk. They can target messages based on your company and your industry sector. And this is an example of that. Obviously, it makes it a lot more likely that people in a particular sector will open a message if it looks like it's tailored for their particular business role, for their particular function, for their particular niche. So when you receive an email like this one, for example, with an attached document, in this case, it's a Microsoft Office document, and we should never open Microsoft Office documents that are sent by email randomly, right? If you receive something that you weren't expecting to receive, certainly Microsoft Office has a lot of capacity around executing malicious code. So we know not to open that kind of document. But if we have any concerns whatsoever, my recommendation is to go to virustotal.com and upload the file. And in this particular case, you can see that that file triggers a whole bunch of antivirus tools. So what this site is, and it's an amazing site, it actually contains all, practically the vast majority of antivirus programs are running in the background. And when you upload a file, it checks that file against not just one antivirus, which might be what you might be running on your computer right now, but it checks it against all of them. And as a result, some of those which update themselves more frequently and more quickly will flag this file if it has been reported in the past. So it's a good way of getting some additional intel before clicking on things. And also, if you do advise your coworkers to use prudence and vigilance, it's also important to tell them what to do. It's not enough to say, hey, you know what, take some time to think about this, take your time, do not react impulsively, etc. It actually is much more helpful to say, well, while you're taking your time, why don't you take that document and without opening it, upload it to virustotal.com. Now, make sure you're not uploading a confidential document that belongs to your company. Make sure you're not uploading a document that contains personal information. Make sure you're just uploading these documents that you were not expecting. And this site will be very useful in helping you determine whether something is malicious or not. The kinds of websites that are now preying upon unsuspecting users are, as you can imagine, exploding, since we've seen the fact that over the month of March, we're looking at tens or hundreds of thousands, if not millions by now, of new domain names being registered. So you can imagine that domain name registrars are only too happy to rake in all that cash. But the fact is that a lot of these websites are simply waiting for people to visit them. So whether they come across them by going through search engines or whether they come across them by clicking on a link in an SMS message, the result is the same. They get to a website and that website fingerprints their device. It knows whether you're using an Android or a Windows 10 machine or what have you, and it targets that malicious software for that particular device. In the cases that we've seen early on with the coronavirus map, which was released more than a month ago at this point and was easily detected, and by the way, we haven't found evidence of new ones, which is suspicious in and of itself. It means that they've become much more advanced at this point, not that they've just given up, right? We're not assuming that cyber criminals have given up at this point, but the one piece of evidence that we had was this fake coronavirus map, which invited people to download an update. And that update contained a keylogger. That keylogger looked on their system for passwords, for credentials, usernames, and passwords for sites like Steam, for example, but also in general, login names and access credentials for any sites, right? So it would install itself in memory and literally watch your keyboard as you're going through your day and steal that important access information and then upload it to what's called a command and control server. And from there, that command and control server is able to control a number of thousands of infected computers. And of course, that information is passed on to whoever owns it, whatever anonymous individual is controlling that entire system. So that's a highly dangerous piece of software. In fact, I would say it's even more dangerous than ransomware, but right now it's likely going to also install ransomware, although we haven't seen it yet. Right? So the first things that criminals want to do is to steal your information, and then they want to turn around and lock up your computer and extort you. So watch for that. So clicking those links can obviously compromise phones and computers, and you can see that the more credible a domain name is, the better it is. So this Mask Red Cross site, which arrives via targeted text message, you obviously don't want to click on that. What you want to do is you want to go to virustotal.com and upload it using that URL upload function. And as you can see here, at least on my computer, recently I ran this and it looked like 2 sites flagged it as a phishing site or phishing and spam site. So it really depends. Now, we know that was not a legitimate site. We know for sure that it certainly was a sketchy site. And really, I'm quite satisfied with 2 engines detecting it. So we should, but as a result, we don't want to have a false sense of security just because only 2 engines detected it, right? It's important to have something to verify against, even if a site like this does not provide positive verification that this is a malicious site. We should still be suspicious. Why? Because a lot of these websites, when they, so for example, I'm talking about urlscan.io, another very useful site where you can go and check a database of gazillions, like literally hundreds of thousands. You can see that just by typing the word coronavirus, it comes up with over 43,000 URLs that have been checked by individuals over the past few weeks. And people are continually submitting these. So as I was saying, just because it's not in the database, it doesn't mean it's legitimate. It simply means that a lot of these malicious sites know when urlscan.io is contacting them, and they are blocking that site because they're not stupid. They're not going to allow themselves to be fingerprinted in turn. So don't expect to have 100% positive proof. Just use your common sense, and certainly encourage people to be to remain vigilant and go to websites like this one and double check. It's always useful. It's also useful to test your own cyber situational awareness using tools that will present you with phishing messages, and you have an opportunity to test yourself. The first one at the top is a Canadian company, ClickArmor, that created this phishing test specific for COVID-19 type of scams. So I encourage you to check it out. And the next one is my favorite. It's called Jigsaw. Google made it. It's fun for kids. It's fun for adults. It's very easy to go through it and test yourself against some pretty tricky phishing messages, and it doesn't penalize you, and it doesn't record how you've done, and so on and so forth. And there's a number of others that you can check out and share if you find them useful. So the key critical piece of advice here is to develop that critical thinking, and we've seen this piece of advice a few weeks ago. I think the test to hold your breath for more than 10 seconds. And if you can, then you don't have the coronavirus. We saw that on TV in the States. I saw it while I was down there. It's made the rounds on various TV channels like Fox News and various other partisan type news sources. And so we obviously can't go after every single claim in the world and say, yeah, no, that doesn't make sense. Ultimately, people have to realize that they're responsible for developing those critical thinking skills. And also for organizations, for companies of all sizes, I recommend that they share a lot of these tips between employees, not to the point where they're creating so much noise that nobody knows what's legitimate, but that there's some sort of a mechanism for the company to say, hey, you know what? We received this piece of spam that has our company name in it. Therefore, we are being uniquely targeted. That's the kind of very specific attack that is worth sharing without increasing the amount of noise, because there is a lot of that noise. And of course, it comes across a number of channels. And some of those channels, as you can see, are in person. The door-to-door scams are a real thing. This, again, in Florida, people with lab coats on and these fake coronavirus test kits that go around and ask for $300 to test people on the spot. And who knows, by the end of the day, they might make a few bucks by going door to door. So so do ensure that if you share some of this information with teleworkers or working from home, WFH is now the new buzzword, that you include some of those in-person channels just to show people that there's a wide variety of ways to exploit the situation. And it's important to remember that reporting is not useless. Reporting helps everyone get a sense of what those statistics are. So the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has been actively sharing a lot of this advice with the public. They have been sharing it with law enforcement across Canada. Law enforcement is now closing down a number of websites that they are able to reach. And so that's not nothing. It's important to realize that fraudsters can pose as any number of different things. As you can see here, again, from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, the most impersonated organizations are the CDC and the Public Health Agency of Canada. We've seen the Red Cross SMS, fraudulent text message. We see any number of government departments, and of course, companies themselves are being impersonated and their brands are being exploited. So watch out for those door-to-door salespeople and private companies offering all sorts of kits and tests and things available for sale, because they will look for that cash up front. They will look for to even give you a huge price and then say, well, you can just pay this deposit. Well, that deposit is the scam. So there are some trusted resources and advice that the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center is sharing and is recommending. And of course, from a health perspective, there really shouldn't be much of a need to go too far beyond the Public Health Agency of Canada. But unfortunately, the difference between today and last time we saw an epidemic with SARS and with Ebola, the volume of internet traffic has increased by more than 50%, in some cases by 100%. Even just since 2014, when Ebola was making the rounds, that traffic has now increased by 50% since then. So that's a lot of noise. And that noise is people clicking back and forth and sharing things and making decisions based on their own level of situational awareness. So here's how not to become a victim of fraud. I pulled these out of my cyber fraud handbook since it was handy, and you'll notice that they actually apply here because this is not a new thing. Obviously, it deals with FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And if you can appeal to fear, uncertainty, and doubt, this is the kind of situation that is ideal for fraud to perpetuate itself. Don't use cash or crypto coin to pay security deposits. Be aware of advance fee fraud. Do not send any money ahead. Do not cash checks that you receive. Generally speaking, if you receive a check that is an overpayment, that's an overpayment scam, and they typically ask you to pay something back. Well, that's obviously going to be a fraudulent situation. And if you're not expecting that check, well, don't be cashing it. Obviously, people are a lot more likely to be cashing checks in this climate than they were, let's say, 2 months ago, when we didn't have this kind of situation that also presents all sorts of financial challenges. In general, use long and unique passphrases for transactions. Don't make transactions easy to compromise. Avoid sellers whose location you cannot verify for yourself. Common sense, right? You don't buy things from people who are anonymous. If you didn't place the call, you can't know who is calling, right? So when you receive calls, you better be able to say to them, well, why don't I call you back in 10 minutes? Just give me a number. Or can I call your organization? Maybe I can call the bank myself and check that this is legit, because I have no idea who you are. And just because it says the name of the bank on my caller ID doesn't mean I can trust you. Never share information containing permanent identifiers. So this is one of my big pet peeves is the fact that people don't necessarily have an intuitive sense of the different kinds of personal information that are being shared. There's the personal information that identifies you, like the information on a credit card, the number on a credit card, the expiry date, all these things that are identifiers because that card is associated with you. But those are easily changed. And in fact, if your credit card gets compromised, that's the easiest thing to fix. But it's much harder to fix your social insurance number getting out or being compromised, or your health information. So permanent identifiers make a difference. So don't share those just because people are calling and asking for your driver's license to supposedly identify you over the phone. Don't agree to phone requests for payment. beware of sharing personal information with sellers. So just sellers, just organizations that you're buying stuff from have no reason to be asking you for invasive, privacy invasive information. Distrust rewards, stimulus payments, and easy job offers. Take your time and look carefully at images and links that you receive. So a lot of the time people get images from people that that might in fact just be stolen from the internet. And you can use a website like tineye.com and take the image and you upload it to TinEye, and TinEye will tell you whether that that image is somewhere else on the internet. It's a useful site that I use a lot. And again, it helps people slow down the process, right? You're giving them something to do instead of just reacting impulsively. So feel free to connect with me if you have any additional questions after this seminar is over. Feel free to email me directly or check out the YouTube channel, or check out the Chamber's YouTube channel, which I don't have up here, but I'm going to ask Carrie Ann to tell us what it is. All of those other social media links are the legitimate ones. That's why they have my name in them. So Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Feel free to reach out on there. I strive to provide useful information that is very specific to each one of those, right? So they're not sales channels. They are simply information sharing channels for us. And with that, I thank the Stouffville Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to present this. I hope it has been useful, and I'm going to be waiting for some questions.